recently befriended each other at an event here in Santa Fe. I was very lucky to find that he was in town and actually relatively close as a neighbor to me. Small world, right, Kevin?
Right. Small
And
world. Good to be here, by the way.
yeah, no, honestly, I'm really glad you're here. You and I have a lot to talk about. So, before we jump in, I've always find it very, very helpful. And one, you're gonna tell me a little bit about the AI Ethics Institute. But further than that, I want to understand a little bit about your journey that led you to the point of even becoming a part of the AI Ethics Institute, right? And why you're pursuing that now. Does that work?
Yeah,
All right,
sounds
so
good.
let's go back in time. Where should we start?
Uh, Probably in my schooling, undergrad and graduate school. I started as a science major, went to grad school in liberal arts, English, and philosophy, aesthetic philosophy specifically. And
And what do you mean by that? For the people that aren't educated in philosophy, I'm not like taking a knock at them. What does that mean?
yeah, so the literature program I was in was heavily involved with the philosophy of art and including literature. So, aesthetic philosophy. They called it critical theory, which I think is a silly name. Um, so I had a lot of background in philosophy and literature, and also I have an undergraduate degree in economics. So I had this sort of eclectic background, and I loved science. I had a lot of science education, and that sort of drew me into the early days of computers. I started exploring in the late '80s while I was in graduate school how to use them as an educational tool. And then, so I worked on that and published on that when I got my first job in the '90s. And
Was that doing something with computers and education?
yeah, for instance, back in the days before we had chat, there was only chat on local area networks, so you could get in a room and use a special chat program. So
You're on land. The guy's 20 feet away. Hey, Jim,
exactly. Well, that's what my colleagues thought too.
could have yelled at him, you know?
So I told my students, instead of discussing, Shakespeare and verbally, we're going to discuss it on a chat program. And then I watched how things went, and I published on it. And to my surprise, actually, the chat worked better as class discussion because shy people were more inclined to participate.
This is interesting. So now when there's a medium like that, when someone can sit behind a keyboard, we all know trolls on the internet and all that other good stuff. But
Right.
was there also a magnification of those who like to share? Were they oversharing? You know,
No,
did it uplift those that otherwise wouldn't participate in a very social setting?
right. That's exactly what happened. And they couldn't mess around because I could see everybody's computer monitor. I had a
Yeah.
special screen. And if somebody started goofing off, I would just look up and say, John, you got to keep on topic or I'm going to cut you off.
Right.
And that worked. So I was sort of the moderator. And but
S-
I didn't have to do much. I just put a prompt up, they would discuss it, I'd jump in, and usually I'd just stop the discussion and then I'd go to the oral discussion and say, let's look at what we've talked about on screen. And I would try to prod the shy people who had participated into saying more about what they said on the screen. And that
Mm.
worked pretty well. So anyway, that was the beginning of my preoccupation with tech, digital technology.
Is that when you saw that it could be actually a beneficial extension of humans?
Right. So I thought everybody was very skeptical. In an English department, they're in love with dusty old books, right?
I like dusty old books. I'm
And I
not.
do too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But they liked them exclusively. And when they would sit in on my class, they would look frightened and and afterwards say things to me like, "So, do you think computers are going to take over our jobs?" And this is in the '90s. And
Mm.
also it was kind of disconcerting just to hear clickety clicking and nobody talking.
Yeah.
And they could see what was going on the screen, but they were thrown with all this new stuff. And I eventually had a really hard time keeping my job because I was doing what I was doing. And some people, old fashioned humanists, saw me as the devil.
Now,
But
why is that? I mean, you got a background in philosophy.
yeah, well,
Why
I
do you
mean,
think people are pegging you, through association that the use of technology or even being a proponent for it and moving into systems which are frankly classical systems? Why would they view that as such a negative thing? It almost feels like, a religious retort.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, part of it is because they saw they saw their favorite things, books,
Mhm.
under attack by digital equipment. They were concerned that I was having discussions on online. They were concerned that I was using digital documents instead of um, hard copy books. Like I didn't want my students to have to spend $100 or $200 on a Shakespeare book. So
Kevin, you're a heretic.
and so I found a way to places online where they could get the text for free. And I also got attacked at conferences by people who worked for publishing companies because of that. And I said, well, if you stop taking advantage of the people who can least afford to pay for these books,
Who would probably be benefit most from reading them because
yes,
they want access. You know, in most instances, people that have access to everything don't
yeah,
really give a shit. But the
right.
people who don't have access to things care a lot and really want those things.
And P.S. academic publishing companies price gouge, in my opinion, compared to buying other kinds of books.
Mhm.
You you get a novel online at Amazon, you're gonna pay maybe 25 bucks for the novel, but if you buy a textbook, you're gonna pay a couple $100. And PS, if you're a student, you don't have a couple $100
Mm.
often. So,
No.
so now my students, they're even better than I am at finding free texts. They told me about pirate sites where they could get a PDF of, like, a Hemingway novel, and, my response was, "I don't wanna hear anymore."
Just read
This
it and tell me what you thought
right,
about it, but I don't care where you got it
right.
from.
"I don't want it. This is illegal.
Yeah.
I can't talk about this. It's copyright infringement."
Yeah.
But so the good and the bad are sort of wrapped up together. I believe in copyright. I'm a writer myself. I've published, and the idea that people are scraping my stuff off the internet for free is a little disconcerting. I don't make a lot of money out of my publications, but still, it would be nice if people would pay me the small amount that I get.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll make like $100 or $200 a year.
I think that's why there's, and not to get sidetracked here, why there's been such a transition towards smaller communities of people subscribing to an individual author's thought process rather than trying to sell mass publications to the mass public.
You mean like a blog?
Yeah, and having that blog paid for.
Hmm.
You know, less likely to be scraped. It's, yeah, it's way more restricted, but the people who really want to pay and learn will sink their teeth into it and continue to pay for it because they're seeing that value. I actually think there's a better concentration of value and a better receptivity for what's being said. You know, I had this conversation. I don't want to get sidetracked, but
Well, I mean, I'm involved in the world of text because of my graduate degree. My PhD is in technically in English literature with subtopics in philosophy and rhetoric and that kind of thing.
yeah,
But so I don't mind talking about, texts and the world of copyright and that kind of stuff at all.
no, I know, and I appreciate that, and I think one of the elements are there is a knowledge itself. There are tenets of it that need to be open access,
Mhm.
truly. But when it comes to fundamental specialities of something, if you're putting in the work, people should be recompensed for the work. It requires effort.
Yeah,
But if you
right.
can find better concentrated ways to do it, and I think that's why the publishing houses are hurting so bad. They're looking for that same old world to keep those margins high, but really those people who are writing rich, useful, purposeful blogs that have a following of say 1,000 or 2,000 people,
Mhm.
that's enough to sustain themselves. Because those people can pay a good amount just for them to sit down and really focus on the core things they're really, really good at rather than trying to write something that's marketable.
Yeah, that's true. Plus, the whole industry of publishing is based on an antiquated model now. I mean, where you have all these middlemen.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, you have to have an agent to get a novel published by someplace like Random House. You got to first find an agent, and agents are really hard to come by unless you're recommended to them by somebody or another writer recommends you.
And then they have to pitch it. You're good, man. I'll
uh,
adjust it for you. They have to pitch it to
to
the
the
house then, right?
well,
Random House,
you
for
you
instance.
pitch it to the agent pitches it to the houses, and one of the houses hopefully will pick it up and then pay you.
Could you imagine just pitching all your stuff to a gatekeeper and you're like, "I know this is valuable and I have to bring it to you," and then you determine the value and then go tell somebody else what the value is?
Which is why most people I know who are authors, I went where I went to school had a big MFA, writing program.
Okay.
Second best one behind Iowa, University of Iowa. It was UC Irvine, and so, one of the guys I went to school with there, for instance, won the Pulitzer Prize, Michael Chabon. Anyway, those people all had an in automatically because their teachers at the school
Mhm.
were published authors with agents, and the agents listened to them if they went to him and said, "Listen, I have
This
a
is a
student
quality
who's
student.
really good."
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that whole model, it's like an old boys network, and I mean old boys. It wasn't as friendly for women. So most people now that I know who are publishing
Mhm.
are self-publishing through Amazon. They get more money for one thing.
Sure.
Instead of having to pay your agent 20%, you split 50-50 with Amazon. If you're charging like $3 a book and you have 35,000 people, or let's make it easier math, 40,000 people buy your book, you get at $2 a book, you get 40,000, half of that, $20,000.
Yeah.
And so a cousin of mine, a good friend of mine that lives in El Dorado, just over by us, they both do that. And my cousin earned enough money to buy a new house with a swimming pool.
I think that's fantastic.
And when her second book was out,
Mhm.
agents came calling to her and she told them, Go away. I make a lot more money without you."
So for those of you who are listening to this, self-publish first. Start with that. Don't go begging off to the big boys. You can make it happen and then they'll come clawing to you. You
It-
invert the model.
if you're in the top 10 in Amazon for novelists who self-published, you're going to have agents coming after you.
Yeah. No, I get that. So take a step back. You classical literature, access to information or knowledge, moving digital technology into the classroom
Mhm.
seems somewhat heretical. Go to conferences, you get the same sort of blowback even from publishers. What happens next in the transition of your work? There must be a mutation in your teaching because now you're starting to see something quite novel here.
Right. Yeah, so around early 2000s, what I did was considered heresy, but then it soon became the norm.
Mhm.
Eventually, and when it became the norm, I got hired by a different school that was a tech school. They liked what I did because it was technology,
Sure.
and they wanted me to teach their engineering students and computer science students about the crossover between humanities and technology. So it was just a matter of evolution. I went from teaching with technology to how technology changes people and society, and I got into writing about posthumanism, which was still new back then, 20 something years ago. Um,
Is there a crossover?
oh yeah, I mean, because transhumanism and its ultimate end, posthumanism, is all about incorporating technology into the human frame. So into your
How's the
body and mind.
Okay, so that's the frame. Frame is body and mind. That's how it's
Right.
defined.
Right. So, for instance, transhumans modify themselves, are in favor of modifying themselves with technology for positive benefit.
Question about that
Hmm.
because this is getting deep quickly. When you speak about modification,
Right.
physical modification or consciousness modification or both?
Both. Although they wouldn't say consciousness, they would say mental and physical transformation. So, for instance, they would be really, in fact, they have been really into Elon Musk's
Neuralink,
project with, yeah, with what's it called,
Neuralink.
Neuralink,
Yeah.
where basically he's developing ideally an implantable Wi-Fi antenna for the brain, which would allow you to connect immediately to digital devices and the internet. So you don't have to download anything. If somebody asks you a question, it simply goes out automatically to the internet, and within a split second, you have the answer.
Wouldn't you have to associate electronic waveform impulses with information and then know how to decipher that? So
Right.
what happens is you'd probably have to start. I've never done this before. I'm thinking about it for the first time. If I'm a human being, you ask me to think about a subject.
Hmm.
You'd have to analyze the 5 waveforms in my brain
Hmm.
for when I begin to think about it.
Right.
Then you'd also have to marry that with the signaling that happens from the Neuralink so that when you're thinking about a specific topic or subject, it passes it over. And so your brain knows how to associate with those signals, right?
Right. So what they did is the key discovery. This is about 6 years ago at
Hmm.
Harvard. Charles Lieber and his team of neuroscientists already figured out what their key development was a translation module that translates brainwaves into digital
Ah,
uh,
okay.
code and back and vice versa. So they've already successfully worked on this. Those people with monkeys and rats, and they not only were
Is the
pretty
rat on Wikipedia or something? How to fucking escape.
what they did is simple stuff like they taught a rat how to run a maze, and then the rat could communicate that knowledge to another rat through the embedded Wi-Fi antennas. Um, you know, Musk made up a name for it called neural lace, the actual implant.
Hmm.
What it actually is a simple, very fine mesh that's like a couple microns thick.
Okay.
You so fine that you could fold it up and fit it in a syringe. And the Harvard scientists' idea with this brain computer interface was that they would put that mesh into a syringe, then inject it in the carotid artery
Okay.
eventually,
Send it
and it
up.
would go up to the brain and
Yeah.
unfold and incorporate. And they couldn't figure out how to get that carotid artery avenue open,
It's like when
but
they do ablations in people who have AFib. They do it up
right.
through the groin, and it goes up the artery into the heart.
Right. But what they got as far as still opening up the head with a hole, planting the mesh into a rat or monkey brain,
Hmm.
it would unfold. Took about a week, I think it was, to unfold, and it was had no side effects. And then it would start working as a transmitter
Hmm.
with a translation module externally, and they actually uh, could feed rats information and get information from the rats' brains. However, another neuroscientist I talked to about this, I interviewed at University of Michigan, she said, well, what they didn't tell you in their article was that the body attacks that mesh
Of
as a
course it
foreign
would. It's a
body,
foreign body. Yeah.
and there's no way to prevent that attack. So it dissolves the whole mesh within 6 months.
So
And then
it like brain-based acids on it?
something like that, but it dissolves it and just it disappears after 6 months. You gotta do the operation all over again.
Yeah, that's worthless.
So, that's why one of the reasons they were trying to find a non-invasive way, like injecting into an artery the mesh, because that's simple
Yeah, I get
versus
it.
drilling a hole in your head. So anyway, this whole brain-computer interface, thing, I've written a lot about it. I have a couple articles, in journals and one in a book. So, it's and I talk about it a lot because it's interesting. Especially what Musk envisions, he doesn't stop at normal stuff. He
No.
gets pretty radical. His idea is that he wants it to allow not only rapid communication with devices and the internet, but also rapid intercommunication between humans, like telepathy between humans via this device. That, for me, is kind of scary because what about privacy? How do you how
You
do you
manage
make
that.
privacy then? You can't turn off this thing. And he also, sees it as a way to keep humans from becoming obsolete compared to AI.
Obsolete in what instance?
He thinks AI will be so powerful that it'll make us obsolete for any kind of jobs, but that neural lace would allow us to compete with AI because we'd have very rapid abilities to analyze and absorb facts and all these other things.
So there's a couple things to unpack here. So one, this is seen as the first stages of transhumanism into posthumanism.
Right. So transhumanism is a conversion that happens from that technology
Okay.
from human to superhuman. Okay, let's say. And then once you reach that plateau of being something more than human, that's post-human.
Is it ever
So
possible to be something more than human? I mean,
posthumanists,
you have
posthumanists and transhumanists certainly think so. They think that we could become a whole nother species with technology and plants.
okay. So hear me out on this. In order for us to compete with artificial intelligence, from what I'm understanding here,
Mhm.
we would have to implant ourselves with wetware, or some sort of devices that have a communication speed that matches in some fundamental aspect of technology with what AI is doing in its compute, right?
Right. We incorporate digital stuff into ourselves and thereby become as fast as any other digital device. We become partially digital.
Okay. You remember how we had this like crazy rise to information access with the cell phone?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Have we seen legitimately tangible evolutive benefits for human beings globally because of that?
I would say yes, in part. I mean, smartphones, for all their detractions and distractions,
Mhm.
they also allow, well, as I get older, my memory isn't quite as sharp as it was when I was younger. My digital device here is is a memory extension. I
Yeah.
can, if you ask me something that I can't remember, I can simply, especially if I'm not on camera, I can just I can just look it up on my
What'd
phone
you
and
say
sound
20 minutes ago, Kevin?
and I'll sound really smart.
Shit. Yeah.
So I do this at meetings. I'll have it under the table, and
Yeah.
somebody will be talking about a topic, and I'll think, "Oh, that's like that guy that did something with brain computer interface," and I'll quickly look it up under the table to get the name of the guy. And I'll say, "Oh, that was that guy in 1994 that did blah blah blah." And I sound a lot smarter than I actually am because of my digital device.
So then let me ask you something about your statement you just made.
Okay.
You sound smarter than you actually are.
Well, better
So
memory anyway.
I know. How does this then play to the point which I made about the fact is it truly making humans evolve for the benefit of the human being?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you can be smarter in some way because of a digital device, then you're smarter. I mean, if you want to go into the philosophical
Oh, that's
aspects of that,
exactly what I'm
I know where
doing.
you're headed with this,
Of
that
course you do.
the cost benefit analysis.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, what is it costing us? Well, that cell phone is expensive for one thing,
Mhm.
and almost everybody buys one.
Yeah.
So, if you're not flush with money, spending 8 or $900 for a smartphone is not an easy buy. And that's one of my problems philosophically with this whole amplify yourself with digital or any kind of implants devices. Only the rich will be able to get the really good stuff,
All the
you
good
know?
stuff. Oh yeah.
Like Neuralink, if and when Neuralace becomes it reaches its full potential, how are you and I going to afford it? It's going to cost probably tens of thousands of dollars to have that implant.
I'll tell you how I'll afford it. I won't even buy it.
You'll
If
get a
you think for
pirate.
one damn second I'm gonna shove that thing in my head, you are crazy. And
Yeah.
I'm no Luddite at all. But the way I see this is when people say that artificial intelligence is gonna outpace us.
Mhm.
To me, that's impossible.
Well, I agree with you. I was just
I
stating what
understand. I'm not trying to
tran
stir the pot. I'm just getting to the point, you know?
transhumanists and posthumanists, I was giving you their philosophy of this stuff.
Yes.
I have philosophical problems, as do a lot of tech ethicists like me, about this stuff, you know? You can imagine all kinds of downsides if we start having technology that separates the haves from the have-nots. I mean, think about it. Say 100 years from now, if uh, if the longevity researchers and their fans succeed, along with digital people, the digital developers, like say, you know, Google succeed in doing what they want to do, you'll have people who could live for 400 years and who can amplify themselves with digital devices and drugs that are specially designed for them so that they're smarter, more capable, and longer lived than the average human. Just think about how they could corner the market
Well,
over 400 years of investing and
they
other
sound
things.
like vampires. You know, vampires live a long
Exactly.
time, low heartbeats. You
Right.
know, they learn a lot,
Right.
run
And they have
fast.
superhuman strength.
Yeah, exactly.
The downside for us is they eat our blood and kill us.
Well, this is my metaphor, so this may seem crass. Do we want those people living for 400 years?
uh,
Say, for instance, right?
yeah,
Just roll with me on this. And I know this is a tech podcast. Say, for instance, this technology was available for someone like Adolf Hitler.
right.
Would people be like, "Ah, what a great tech. So glad we made it. Fantastic. I'm glad the right people got their hands on it."
Yeah.
Because last I checked, we have some serious self restraint issues as human beings. And so when you hand someone something, albeit incredible, that they could live longer, be stronger, be smarter, be faster, compete with the machines which they've created, great. But do you have the capacity, the self responsibility to manage something like that?
And the money.
And the money. Yeah.
Well, you're hitting on something I've been thinking about since I was 14
What's that?
and worried about nuclear weapons, which is it's like handing it's like a 2-year-old suddenly developing, um, a car, and they're 2 years old, and driving that car is highly dangerous for a 2-year-old,
It's
right? So we're like 2-year-olds with these nuclear weapons, and now with digital devices and AI and all these other things, and corporations don't like what I say when I say we need to regulate this stuff and use it responsibly and judiciously because they see me as saying, slow down.
there's no what's wrong with slowing down though?
It costs them money. It costs them competitiveness. You know, I've had I've talked with people from the corporate world and who work in AI, and they get angry when I say, well, regulation is good of AI. We need to figure out what we're doing with this stuff before we're going so fast, you know? And their response is, "So you're gonna keep me from competing with Google now?" And they'll get an even bigger edge in the market because you wanna slow us down. That's the way they see it, you know? I'm a voice crying in the wilderness, and in fact, I told you before when we were talking, that
Good memory. You didn't even have to check your phone.
yes, and luckily and I didn't record that conversation, so, um, yeah, I mean, I don't get a lot of people calling me to come work for their corporation to help them develop AI ethics for their new AI apps because it's not time yet. I'm too far ahead. They're busy trying to push product now.
Mhm.
They're not worried about ethics because they haven't had a catastrophe.
Yeah, the only it's laws are written in blood, right?
That's right.
Yeah, classic. So they have to wait for something horrific to happen
Something
before they're
blows
like,
up, and
yeah.
then all of a sudden, I'll be marketable.
Yeah.
And
Oh, wow. Do you guys hold on, I gotta check my phone. I'm trying to remember this guy's name I spoke with. This AI ethicist. Oh shit, my memory's wiped on my phone.
right.
I'm absolutely useless. I've been so reliant on it.
He told us this was gonna happen.
Yeah.
Damn it, I wish I'd
Yeah.
written his name.
Oh, good old pen and paper. So with the we see the view of transhumanism into posthumanism. Do posthumanists see it as truly a beneficial future? What seems absurd to me is that human beings would be
Mhm.
competing against the thing they create.
Right.
That just seems totally imbecilic in my mind.
Talk to it does, and
How
frank
could it not?
and
How could it not
frankly,
be?
these
Yeah.
the technology tycoons talk out of both sides of their mouth, especially Elon Musk. I hope I don't get sued because 'cause I'm saying this on air,
Oh,
but
this is the best channel to get sued on is TARTLEcast. I got to tell you.
but it's the simple truth. I have all kinds of articles to back this up, where he just says to writers who write it down that, we need to compete with AI because it's gonna be dangerous. We need to have a plan B where we move to Mars.
Why?
That's his
Because the thing you created in a totally unchecked manner has been just backfiring on you.
That's right. So he
Interesting.
said he said plan A is to build ourselves up so we can compete with AI. Plan B is to get off Earth somewhere else, and Mars is my place, to get away from the AI we created. So, and then so he's at once you know, a booster of the stuff he's helping to create, and
Mhm.
and also he's a Pandora, predicting disaster and trying to figure out how to avoid that disaster. Well, why not avoid disaster the simple way?
Don't do it.
Right.
I figured it
Regulate
out.
regulate it so that you don't do stupid things,
Yeah.
while you're developing it.
So what do you think and this transitions into the AI Ethics Institute. So
Yeah.
let's begin with this now. Now that we're getting to this part of the conversation. What is your role at the AI Ethics Institute?
Okay, so the Global AI Ethics Institute, or Gaia, as we like to call it, is a startup institute that focuses on expanding our notions of ethics for AI beyond just Western ethics, European philosophy.
Mhm.
And so we're trying to, get members in the organization from India who know stuff about Hindu philosophy, and people from Japan that have Shinto philosophy and so forth, Buddhist philosophers, um, to contribute so that we can expand our idea of ethics. Um, so what I do is I'm on the board of directors. I'm the director of research and academic affairs. We don't do a lot of academic stuff. I'm from academics, but I keep promoting to the rest of the board members that we need to deal with everybody and include everybody, especially business people
Mhm.
in this organization. So I try to steer what kinds of things we're producing um, in terms of research and what audience we produce them for. Um, so that's my job. Right now, one of the things I'm doing is running at the tail end of running an essay contest where we award $1,000 to the best article, best published article written this past year in 2024 on AI ethics. And so we're about to start judging the entries. So that's one of the things, that kind of thing. I also suggest a research topic um, that other people in the organization might work on. I help advise groups that already are working on their own research topic. For instance, there's a PhD candidate in law in Morocco who who's a Muslim, but what he wants to do is look at uh, the ethics of new technology for medicine in Morocco. They don't have a HIPAA law there, for
Mhm.
instance. So when I was, going back and forth with them in email, I said, you should take a look at the United States HIPAA laws, which supposedly guarantee privacy about medical information.
They guarantee a loophole.
Yes, you can sign
I
away
know this for a fact.
you can
Yeah.
sign away those rights, but they don't have anything like that. So that's an example of a research project he's doing,
Mm.
and he's part of our organization, and he is not part of typical Western philosophical, um, you know, uh, education.
So strategic question for you then,
Yeah.
with the institute and what you do. If nothing is being regulated in the nature which you're trying to regulate, where do you start? How do you know where your focal point is going to be, where you're gonna be most effective? Are you analyzing the pace and development of artificial intelligence, how it's being used, and being like, "Okay, this is where we should try and interject ourselves with our research and do something for it"? Like, how are you deciding that?
Yeah. Well, I do a lot of research because I've been doing a lot of research for the last 25, 30 years now on technology and society.
Mhm.
So I use my acquired research to advise the institute where we should be focusing. In my opinion, we need to focus first on getting government regulations in place, and that's happening. Um, don't know how effective it's going to be because, as you know, in the United States, the AI regulations are voluntary, and they were
Mhm.
put in place by Biden as a presidential, mandate, which really doesn't have a lot of teeth because there's no punishment if corporations don't follow them, because they're the ones that made these regulations, and they're going to do it voluntarily or not.
Yeah.
In the EU, they have a much better structure where they have EU regulations now just instituted about AI, and they're pretty comprehensive regulations, and there's punishments for not following them.
How many kind of a commercial question, I suppose. How many major AI firms have come out of the EU?
There's more than you think. I see them in my organizational work because the people I deal with are all over the globe, but
Mhm.
a lot of them are European. And so they have they have their own AI companies. They're not as big as the US ones.
Clearly.
The US has, I mean, the major player. There's a saying that somebody from Europe snidely told me. The United States is the best at creating AI. Chinese, they're the best at stealing AI, and the Europeans are the best at regulating AI, but they don't necessarily do the other two things very well.
Right.
So, you know, the EU is good at regulating everything,
Yeah,
and people who are more laissez-faire, developers and economists, they don't like that. They wish they were here so they could just do what they wanted.
sure. Now, you guys are going forward, you're doing this research. Explain this to me in case I just don't have the capacity to understand. And this has almost been a philosophical but mental exercise limitation for me. Everybody's worried about the advancement of technology very, very quickly. And for instance, artificial intelligence. You saw this as an early precursor in your career when you started bringing in technology into the classics. People are like, bad, bad, bad. That's not good. It's going to take over my job. How is it that human beings continue to put this thing they create in front of them and assume it's in total control when they're the ones that designed it?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I asked the same question. Uh, I
Am I being unreasonable, Kevin, when I ask this?
well, when people would ask me in the '90s, "Do you think computers will take my job?" I always would answer, and this didn't make me popular, but I would answer, "Well, if it tries, you can just unplug it."
Yeah. Yep. That checks out.
Yeah, and with AI, there's so many glitches. Uh, AI is not reliable, and, that's why I don't think it's gonna take over the world,
How could it take over? So,
well,
there's
everybody worries about the Terminator scenario, right?
they're already putting automatic weapons on those robot dogs from Boston Dynamics. That's troubling.
They've been doing that for 20 years.
And now they've strapped really advanced AI in it. Very troubling. Oh, say, for instance, you don't have the ability to pull the plug out. Don't you think that's a major design flaw? Just off the rip.
Of course. There's a guy named, trying to remember his name now, but
Check your phone.
yeah, right.
I'm gonna keep
Pe
hammering you on
I
that.
I'm
Yeah.
going with my organic memory here.
Uh-huh.
Peter Singer. He
Okay.
he wrote he works for, an institute, but he's written a bunch of books. The one I read that I really like is called Wired for War, and it's about, almost a decade old now, but
Okay.
he interviewed a whole bunch of, you know, specialists in computer science and military people. He knew a lot of military people from his institute and technologists and so forth. The book asks, how will intelligent technology change warfare? One of the things, a whole chapter is devoted to rebellious AI and the whole idea of an AI rebellion like the Terminator, um, or an AI, an autonomous weapon simply killing a whole bunch of friendlies, or
Mhm.
doing something horrible like that. And the military people and technologists who answered him said, look, when your computer starts going wonky, you see you see symptoms of it before it goes blue screen,
Mhm.
weird stuff starts happening. You pull the plug at that point. And that's their point was we will see warning signs, well ahead of time if our technology starts going south. And I agree with that. I mean, these people know what they're talking about. Also, most of the computer scientists I've talked to said, um, artificial general intelligence that's at human level or above is not a likely thing to happen because of technology limitations. We don't have silicon isn't big enough to incorporate all the transistors we need for really intelligent AI. You got to find another substrate. And right now they're trying quantum computing and molecular computing and
Yeah,
that
but you
kind
have
of
to keep
stuff.
that too cold. You couldn't put that in a reasonable machine for AGI to happen.
Yeah, quantum computing needs ridiculously low temperatures,
Yeah.
and it's expensive to make those things. Plus, it's not good at doing simple problems that you need quantum computers for, just like these huge, big problems. Anyway, it's not there's not a lot of viable, plus you need a ton of energy. Think about, you're a data person.
Mhm.
Think about all the energy data centers take up already.
Yeah.
We don't have a way to produce all that energy
No.
successfully.
And it's funny that we again created something that requires unsustainable amounts of um, energy and volume of data,
right?
and but we don't have mechanisms to support the energy. The data we do, I've built it, but nothing in terms of the energy.
Well, we're running out of. There's an article in this morning's newspaper, the New York Times. Again, I hate to, you know, ad for the New York Times, but so the article is about the fact that data centers, in particular, um, are using up a lot of energy that we don't have, and certain states in the United States are putting the kibosh on building new data centers and new server centers
Mhm.
because they can't afford to transmit the energy to them. One of the places that's not like that is evidently Washington State has tons of energy that it can supply, I guess by you know hydroelectric or something. But the other thing that is limiting is sometimes the government does do regulations, and in this morning's Times, I
Mhm.
sent you this article this morning.
Do you work for the Times or something? Yeah.
I it's a good newspaper. I do read the Wall Street Journal too, but, anyway, the Times said that tomorrow, as early as tomorrow, the Biden administration is going to institute a regulation that prohibits building data centers and, server centers outside the United States or any of its allies states.
Yeah. If you go on the Import-Export Bank of the United States,
Yeah,
whatever, EINX.org gov or something, they have a section that talks about how they wanna directly compete with China and their artificial intelligence,
right.
and, they'll do everything they can to help you, um, get special export privileges, but make sure it goes to the right people.
Exactly, and that's what that regulation this morning in this morning's paper is about, that chips can only be exported to certain allies and not to China, not to Russia, and those chips are the basis for the server centers and data centers.
Mhm.
So, they're hoping that if they prohibit export of these things, China will fall behind us. I don't I'm not optimistic about this because, like I said, China's really good at stealing technology,
China's also extremely advanced.
that too. They're still what from everything I've read, they're still behind us in developing AI, but
I think we'd be surprised.
every time we get a new thing, a new
Mhm.
chip or whatever, they have it within 6 months because they
Eh
have good spies.
yeah, and it's also that, there is a phenomenon that happens with human beings where, say, multiple scientists are working on a specific problem.
Mhm.
Once no communication with one another, once one of them solves it, the rest of them seem to solve it. The same thing started to happen, and you can see other tangents of this, tangential things with this that happened in sports. One
Mhm.
person breaks a record, they start to see what's possible. Many people start breaking a record that they thought was not possible to break. Something with the collective consciousness of human beings is tied in. It's not very well understood, definitely not well studied,
Yeah,
but I
and
could see how when one pushes the ball a little bit further, the other one's like, "Oh, we can push it further too."
there's a name for that, in German philosophy called Zeitgeist, the spirit of the times,
Mhm.
and, I it happened in the 19th century. You look at Edison's light bulb. There were people developing a light bulb besides him in other parts of the world who
Yeah,
got to it about the same time, but Edison capitalized on it and monetized it much quicker than anybody else could.
yeah.
So yeah, it was an idea for its time. I think that's what happens is we get to a certain point in time and everything sort of coalesces together to make it obvious that we need that thing or it's really could happen.
So, Kevin, obvious next question then. When does it get to the point when things are so obvious we should stop doing what we're doing?
Well, that's a harder thing because humans don't like they get excited about new things and they don't want to stop, That's
This
my
is the self-restraint issue we were discussing earlier.
and think about people with big brains, computer scientists or engineers that I used to teach in the classroom. When they get hooked onto an idea, it's like, "Oh, that's a great idea. I can't wait to finish it." And that's all they focus on is finishing that project, not asking, "Should they finish that project?"
That is a really key metric. And do you Is that a big part of Gaia?
Yes.
Is really starting with that question is, should we do
Mm.
this?
Right. Right.
And how do you determine a should?
Does it harm human beings in a bigger way than it helps human beings?
Okay. And do you guys have to then define harm?
Yeah, we talk about this mostly. A lot of us tend to work alone and then trade our ideas after we've done our work. So, I've asked these questions in articles that I've
Mhm.
written over the past 10 to 15 years. And then I go to conferences, usually with other academics, and we talk about these concepts. Here's the problem: we don't get it out to the public. That's why now I'm trying to publish in regular, you know, magazines
You're getting out to the public right now.
and doing this um, so that I can talk to people, regular people in regular language, not just five other academics. What good is that?
So why are you doing this?
Because I want my knowledge that I've built up over 20 or 30 years to be helpful and to the general public. And I think that people in the academy have gotten away from that idea of a public intellectual who tries to help out society first, and think about their career and or their status, publishing for status among their peers second. um, if you go back to like early 1900s, even poets would try to be public intellectuals and help the public with their knowledge. As I'm trying to think. So T.S. Eliot, for instance, famous poet, early 1900s, he wrote an essay that was
Never heard of
published.
them. I'm sorry.
And
Yeah.
he wrote an essay after he wrote some big poems. He wrote an essay published in a regular magazine called Tradition and the Individual Talent, and it was about how poets need to grow and what they need to do to be good poets. And his idea was to help anybody out there who wanted to be a poet to be one and be good at it. um, I don't see a lot of that anymore. Carl Sagan was another good example. Back in the 70s and 80s,
Mhm.
he would do all kinds of public work that would help people understand the universe better, like scientists understand it. We need more of that.
You know who you remind me of a little bit? Do you know who Diogenes is? The
He's a
cynic.
famous skeptic, yeah,
He used to walk around naked in the streets.
and howl like a dog, yeah.
Yeah, but he would in broad daylight he'd walk around with a lit lantern, and people would stop him. They're like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm just looking for an honest man."
Yeah,
First of
yeah,
all, legendary line, but
yeah.
it's
He
hard.
also lived in a barrel or
Yeah, he
something.
did a big clay pot.
Yeah.
That's right. Just sleep there naked all the time. The the it is really truly difficult to find that level of altruism in others.
Mhm.
So many things are perversely incentivized, and to find those that really want to advance public understanding for the good of public understanding are few and far between. And I think there's an opportunity now for us to come together, given platforms like this,
Mhm.
like-minded individuals, to scale out that knowledge
Uh-huh.
and support each other more effectively. And before, there were many of us in isolated thinking, right?
Right.
And
That's what's rewarded
yeah,
monetarily, right? So that's a problem. I I quit my job at the university in part to have the freedom to do this kind of stuff. If they heard this podcast,
mhm.
I'd have trouble keeping my job.
You know what that tells me? You're saying the right thing.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. When you talk about definitions of harm to human being, the greatest harm is limiting the ability for people to have their creative thoughts. That's massively damaging.
Mhm.
And if we accelerate that process or create institutions or technology that inhibit that, or we pass off our responsibility of thought or memory or learning, the process of learning and development to these other systems, what are we left with? If anything, I find that almost more damaging to human beings than just murdering them en masse. I think this is the
We may
great,
get to that too.
yeah, no, and we honestly, that's inevitably where it's headed.
Mm.
but the overall mutating degradation of human consciousness, how I define it in its totality, I see that quickly eroding. And it's been at a great point of stagnation for quite a long time. We haven't, in my view, and I guess this is backed up by statistics, we haven't seen decreases in famine. We haven't seen decreases in disease. We haven't seen increases in human to human understanding. We haven't seen decreases in conflict.
I'm more optimistic. There's a book. Have you ever read or heard of the book called "The Angels of Our Better Nature"
No, I'm too negative. I could not read
by
something like
Steven
that.
Pinker? He's written a lot of popular books from Harvard
Okay.
psychologist. So he did a study of this statistical study um, going back to 2,000 years ago, and he shows in his book that we actually have become less violent, less war. There's less war and fewer bad things happening
Mhm.
over the last 2,000 years. So, but
Okay.
you're taking an awful long view there, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And we have much bigger propensity. Well, we have much bigger tools now to kill ourselves off. I think that's one of the reasons that wars have become less common because,
They're more effective
well, exactly. We
in
now
terms of eradication. I
we now
should
have the
clarify
ability to
that.
completely wipe ourselves out
Mhm.
in a very short period of time. We didn't have that in the Roman Empire. They had spears. So I would argue with Steven Pinker about this. Steven, are you listening?
Yeah.
Um, that what about that? I'd ask him that question.
And that's how I get back to harm because you mentioned harm, Kevin.
Yeah.
And I don't really think the harm is, albeit necessarily physical, we need to look at. I think it's more of a harm of the mind. I think that is one of the things we need to take a pause and really look at and say, how is this truly affecting the development of human beings and their thought?
Well, I would agree with you 100%.
Cool.
Let me ask you a question,
Oh, you
and
want to
then
ask?
I'll answer the
I
same
usually
question.
never get questions.
Well, it's a question for both of us, right?
Okay.
Because I think if somebody's listening here, their question would be, you guys both work with AI and technology,
This is fair.
so aren't you being hypocritical by criticizing the very technology that you help to enable? You're a data
Hmm.
broker
Hmm.
um, that helps AI exist.
Hmm.
I I'm on record as praising certain types of intelligent technology for doing good things like brain computer interface, not Neuralink specifically, but there are other kinds that help people who have locked-in syndrome or Parkinson's disease or epilepsy. Those brain computer interfaces, or BCIs, help those people with therapy. Okay, so how do you defend the fact you work in the realm of AI and also criticize it?
Yeah. So, in order for you to truly improve something, one, you're going to have to criticize it. So, you
Mhm.
have to understand the errors in its development. But then you also have to offer up a solution that can net those errors out and actually make it develop for the better. At this point in time, yes, we do move quite a bit of data to train large language models, artificial intelligence. But the data we are moving and the process of how it's moved is completely different from how these systems were historically trained, especially since the early 80s. Our goal, right? And I am highly critical, okay? And not to be a hypocrite, but I'm highly critical. These systems have developed through a robbery of information on strictly public information. To me, from how I see things, that is only 40 to 50% of the total knowledge which human beings really create. And I call that explicit public knowledge. The other 50 to 60% that is missing, hopefully, which none of these systems have had the ability to ingest that to truly evolve their models, is implicit information from human beings.
Mhm.
Implicit data or information deals with when Kevin comes into a room and looks at me. He has a whole history of his life, everyone he's interacted with. He listens to my voice. All of his sensors are going off in his biochemical organism and his brain thought patterns, feelings, emotions, you name it, all these other impulses that define for one quick key moment how he's going to sum me up. That knowledge can never be found online through a public data set. It does not happen in an explicit nature. And so, one of the most beautiful, novel, creative, and individualistic elements of human thought has hopefully been missed in the training of these systems, which we are becoming far more reliant on. And I've been very critical to say that if we are going to use this technology, we need to supply it with things that actually make it beneficial to the human being.
Mhm.
And it must mirror or map in a one to one truly how the human thought process or consciousness is really evolving at this moment. So, yes, I am incredibly critical, but not hypocritical because I have identified a problem. I've identified that gap, and I'm here to deliver a solution to fix that gap so that
Mhm.
when we do fix it, it maps and it is really beneficial for what we need to do.
Okay, that's fair enough, and that was I know you do this stuff, but
I know
it
you
I
do.
thought it was a good chance for you to explain to the general public, um, how what you do is not contradictory with how you believe.
No.
And I would say the same thing for me. I do believe that AI can be very beneficial if you use it selectively and judiciously, and I
Right.
say that over and over and over again. That's not what's happening.
No.
So I want my my criticism is about being a little more judicious, a little more careful about how we use the things we create, in particular for me, AI. And that'll come eventually, but I am afraid it's going to come after some big catastrophe or a number of them. And I'd like to see that not happen. So
So,
that's why I keep on talking on shows like this.
in an effort to reduce that, the probabilistic outcomes of negative events for us, where can people find out more about the Global AI Ethics Institute, more about your work, which you have published, Kevin? Where would they go to do something like that?
Okay, so the Global AI Ethics Institute, if you just Google it, we have a website, and so you'll find out more about us there. If you want to know more about what I do and what I think, I have a couple websites. You can find me all my published stuff on a site called academia.edu. Um, and you just go to that website and then search for me. The other place I pub all my most of my publications are on is a place called research.net. Researchgate.net,
Mm.
and that's also a sort of an archive of articles that people have published, usually academics. ResearchGate's mainly scientists. I'm on it because I sort of cross over between science and humanities. Academia.edu is mostly humanists, but a smattering of scientific people as well.
Okay. And to close this up, what is one thing that the public, as they're listening to this right now, should keep a very keen eye on? What would that be? One thing you should tell them they should focus on at this very moment and think about it deeply.
Well, what they should focus on is the product AI turns out. Um, is it something that's helpful or not helpful? Is it something that you see could be dangerous or not?
Okay. You all heard it. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us here again on TartleCast. This was Professor Kevin Legrandeur of the Global AI Ethics Institute, and we look forward to seeing you guys back again soon.
So you like the fact that I put you on the spot?